So, what makes a nation truly powerful? Most of us would probably point to money or military might. But what if the real answer is something much, much deeper? Well, we're about to dig into a really compelling argument from Brazil's Superior War College that pretty much turns that whole idea on its head.
Yeah, just think about it for a second. When we talk about a country being successful, what's the first thing that pops into your head? A booming economy, right? Or maybe a stable government? A powerful military? Well, these essays we're looking at, they suggest we're all looking in the wrong place. They argue the real driver of a nation's destiny is something else entirely. And the answer they come up with isn't something you can find in budget reports or military parades. Nope, they say it's found in the collective soul of a people. What these thinkers call the absolute essential bedrock for any kind of prosperous future. All right, let's dive right in, because this is the core of the whole argument. The central idea here is that the true foundation of any nation is its culture. And we're not just talking about art and music here. It's something much, much deeper than that. So what exactly do they mean by culture? Well, forget the stuff you see in a museum. We're talking about the entire shared reality of a people. The unwritten rules, the shared beliefs, the common habits. It's the whole shebang. It is, quite simply, the way a society lives and breathes. And this is where the whole idea gets really profound. The quote they highlight from T.S. Eliot, it makes such a powerful point. Culture isn't just about how we live our day-to-day lives. It's about why we live. It's the thing that gives a nation its purpose, its reason for being. So, according to these essays, if you really want to understand the world stage, you have to see this fundamental conflict playing out. They argue that history is often just a story of the center, the dominant, so-called civilized powers, versus the periphery, those nations labeled as underdeveloped. It's this constant push and pull between power and dependence. Okay, so how is all this culture actually passed down? It's not just some abstract idea floating in the ether. The source points to three really concrete pillars. First, you've got the family. That's our first teacher, right? Then there's the region, the actual environment we live in, which shapes our way of life. And finally, religion, which often provides a shared moral compass. These are the channels where national identity really flows. All right, so if culture is the foundation, you can think of national sovereignty as the house that's built on top of it. But what happens when that house starts to face a new kind of threat, one that's very modern and incredibly subtle? The key idea here is something they call technological curtailment. And what is that? Well, it's basically a modern form of control. It's when powerful nations or big corporations can strategically choke off another country's development just by denying them access to critical technologies. It's quiet, it's sneaky, but it's an incredibly effective way to keep that center-periphery dynamic we were just talking about firmly in place. And listen, this isn't just some abstract threat. The essays lay out 6 specific ways this actually happens. It can be something as simple as a supplier just refusing to sell a key part, or it can be a government blocking the transfer. It can get more aggressive, too, like a state intervening halfway through a project, or even brute force. And then you have things like hostile takeovers or poaching a country's best minds, the classic brain drain. And of course, just plain old political and economic pressure. To make this all a bit more concrete, to show you how this actually works in the real world, the authors give us a perfect and pretty powerful case study: Brazil's long and very challenging journey to develop its own space program. And this is where the theory gets really, really real. The authors map documented events directly onto those methods of curtailment we just saw. I mean, look at this. You can see clear examples of political pressure from the US to stop Ukraine from transferring rocket tech to Brazil. You see these super restrictive agreements being forced on them. And then, and this is pretty chilling, the text even points to research suggesting that the tragic 2003 launch disaster at Alcantara, which killed 21 people, might have actually been a brute force act of sabotage. But external pressures are only half the story here. To truly consolidate a nation, these thinkers argue you also have to look inward. You have to confront the scars that have been left by your own history. And for Brazil, one of the deepest of these internal scars is something called the Contestado War. This was a brutal 4-year internal conflict back in the early 20th century. We're talking about a bloody, incredibly complex struggle. It even saw the first ever use of aircraft for reconnaissance in a South American conflict. That's how intense it was. And what's so important to understand here is that this wasn't a simple war with two clear sides. It was a perfect storm, a massive collision of different forces. On one hand, you had this aggressive economic development, foreign companies coming in, displacing thousands of people to build railroads and for logging. Well, that led to a complete breakdown of the traditional social fabric. And that, in turn, fueled this powerful, messianic religious movement that promised a whole new world.
Wow. This quote from Marshal Henrique Teixeira, a later Brazilian military leader, it really captures the tragedy of it all, doesn't it? The pain of a nation turning against itself, that leaves a deep, deep scar. And the essays argue that this is an essential lesson for understanding the challenges of national unity today. Because that kind of internal fracture, that's exactly what makes a nation vulnerable to all those external pressures we were just talking about.
Okay, so this brings us to the big final question, right? What do you do with all this? How does a nation take these different threads, its deep-rooted culture, the modern pressures of technology, and the painful lessons from its own past, and weave them all together into something strong?
Well, the ultimate conclusion of these essays is really a call to action. The argument is that Brazil's path to a truly prosperous future isn't about trying to copy other nations, and it's not just about focusing on economic numbers. No, it's about a conscious, deliberate effort to strengthen its own unique national culture, to make it so resilient that it can withstand both those internal divisions and all of those external pressures.
And that really leaves us with a final, pretty challenging thought. Because in our world of globalized culture and technological control, this question isn't just for Brazil, is it? It's for every single nation out there. How can any nation truly forge its own destiny without losing its soul in the process? That is the big question these essays leave us to think about.